Welcome on the Avenue. Welcome to the United Nations of Horror. We're your hosts, Mark and Jason. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Mark. How's it going?
Not bad, not bad. So we're covering pretty much a classic tonight, aren't we? It's Peeping Tom from 1960.
I wonder if you knew my father. Do you know what he was interested in before he died? It has something to do with what causes people to be peeping toms.
Scoptophilia, the morbid urge to gaze.
Did you read about that girl that was murdered last night?
I hope to be a director very soon.
Wow, exciting. When I came in, were you looking at some films?
Yes.
Of yours?
Yes.
I'd like to see them.
Would you like to see them now?
Mother, what's worrying you? Don't you like Mark?
I've met him.
You don't like him. Why not?
I don't trust a man who walks quietly.
Well, he's shy.
His footsteps aren't. They're stealthy.
Suppose they catch you.
Oh, they will. They look very efficient.
Don't you mind?
No.
Mark, you crazy?
Yes. What was it she saw?
Well, surely, Chief, a man coming at her with a sharp weapon.
I'm familiar with that kind of terror. This is something new to me.
Oh, come on, Sonny, make us famous.
Do you know what the most frightening thing in the world is?
We do have a maniac on our hands. If we don't get him quickly, there'll be a third unsolved murder to report to the commissioner.
Whatever I photograph, I always lose.
Instinct's a wonderful thing, isn't it, Mark? A pity it can't be photographed.
And the director was Michael Powell, a British director who was absolutely famous for making some of the most iconic British classic pieces of cinema in the 40s and 50s, which was he made alongside Emmerich Pressburger, Powell and Pressburger, typically called The Archers, sometimes called The Archers, which was their production company. But examples of some of the great films they made include Black Narcissus, The Red Shoes, and Michael Powell decided to make this on his own, right? Well, that's how it came about. I believe it was still an Archer's production. However, it kind of wrecked his career because critics just described it as horrible and terrible. Obviously, it's hard to see why that is when you watch it now, but I think it was just so different. It's one of those films that earmarks the modern horror film. It's the way Psycho does, right? Now, most people hold Night of the Living Dead as the turning point for horror. But, Psycho and Peeping Tom were there earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
8 years earlier, doing this kind of things. This film, Peeping Tom, is a particular favourite of Martin Scorsese. And Martin Scorsese does consider Powell and Pressburger as a big influence on his work. And, I consider, say, Black Narcissus or Matter of Life and Death, which I think in America is sometimes called Stairway to Heaven, are stone cold classics, like some of the best films ever made.
We've covered Black Narcissus here, and it's it's definitely it's something every film fan should see. I feel like
Now this one also interesting choice because it's set in Britain, but they've actually cast a German actor in the lead. Oh, sorry. German-born Austrian actor who is obviously not English, but the script doesn't indicate he's anything other than English. It's very odd. It's an odd choice. However, I like him in the role. It's just a slightly odd choice. You kind of have to go with the fact he's English when he clearly isn't. Right?
Yeah. You definitely get a little bit of an accent, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, huh, interesting.
Yeah.
And so it makes me think like, well, was his father from maybe from Germany? But they don't indicate that. And in fact, his father, we hear him in flashbacks, and he sounds
English,
very much British. Yeah.
Yeah. And that his father is played by Michael Powell, the director. That's the director talking. But he does a fine job. Interesting, right? And I believe the younger version of Mark is played by a child of the director too. So yeah, interesting.
Oh wow.
So various stars, but essentially it's a colourful film. It's a sort of Technicolor, isn't it? I'm not sure it is technically Technicolor, but it's that kind of colour process going on.
Yeah.
It looks the colours are vivid.
Yeah, it's still very striking, I love Technicolor. I love the way it looks. In fact, I mean, we have so many different film grades now, I guess, but I mean, everything's kind of digital and they can go in and make it look a certain way. But I still feel like nothing quite compares to this sort of Technicolor look. The colors are just very crisp, at least, with my vision, of course, but yeah, I'm always very impressed when I see these older films, especially when they're remastered, and they get them looking really nice as they have this.
Yeah. An interesting opening sequence here. Basically, we see a woman being killed from a point of view of the killer, don't we? Which is quite stunning. And this is obviously a prototypical slasher movie. Because of stuff like that, as was Psycho, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the first person view, I immediately thought, like Halloween vibes, except through a camera.
Yeah. Can I ask, Peeping Tom, is that you've heard the expression? Does that it's an English expression. It's got a specific reason, meaning. Shall I explain it?
Right.
I don't know if you know it, but I'm happy to explain it.
Yeah, I mean, I think most Americans are familiar with the term. It's not always, what's used over here. So feel free, please. By all means.
Well, Peeping Tom is the name given. Are you familiar with the famous story of Lady Godiva, who rode a horse naked through the streets of Coventry?
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, everyone had to avert their eyes or, not look. That was part of the sort of, they were sympathetic to her, you see. But one man looked. His name was Tom. So he famously has been called Peeping Tom, which is now passed into the lexicon as anyone who peeps on someone else is a Peeping Tom. And in fact, I have worked in Coventry, and I know Coventry, the city, and they do have both a statue of Lady Godiva, but there are certain walkways where you're walking and you can see a man peeping through a hole. And that is their not a statue. Well, it's coloured, it's painted. It's colourful. It's almost like a gargoyle kind of thing.
That's great.
And that's in Coventry. So Peeping Tom comes from the story of Lady Godiva, that phrase. A voyeur, in other respects. This is, again, one of those early films that considers voyeurism as its subject. And, as we, the audience, watching this, participating in some way, and it's been explored in a lot of other Hitchcock used it quite a lot in some of his stuff as well. Psycho again. So there was evidence of that in Psycho. So it's kind of interesting, right? So essentially, we find out this man, Mark, who kills this woman, and he goes back pretending to be a reporter for, I think he says, The Observer, and films the police sort of removing her corpse, which is interesting. That behaviour is kind of known to psychologists among serial killers, isn't it? And it's kind of interesting. This film has that element, revisiting trying to relive the event by recording it or having a memento or something like that. So it's quite it's got a rich psychology, this film.
Yeah, when he came back to the crime, I thought, oh man, they were like way ahead of their time, because as you say, it is a known thing that killers do. And I thought to myself, oh, this is one sick puppy,
Yeah, and he films a lot. He also works in the film industry. He's like what's called a focus puller, which means he measures the distances to make sure the lens is correct to get it in sharp focus and things like that. But he's also a photographer, but he photographs sort of scantily clad women to be able to so that people could, he sells these pictures on so people like news agents could keep them under the counter and sell them to grubby little men, basically, right?
Yeah, I love the scene where the guy comes in to buy some of these photographs.
How much for the lot? £5. Okay, it's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he goes in. I understand you have a specialist, as it's all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, and he puts them in the educational folder. Actually, he almost forgets his paper, doesn't he?
I like that educational books or something. It's in that thing. I like the fact that Mark, he's very quiet. He's quite good looking, isn't he? And so when the girls talk to him, but he's kind of shy and keeps to himself, doesn't he? And in fact, he lives in a house with tenants, and we do find out it's his family house, and he's actually the landlord, but he hasn't passed on that information. He has to run this house, so he has to get money in some way, I guess. But he's actually the landlord, and he keeps to himself. So everyone else just thinks he's a tenant, and one of the girls quite likes him. Her name's Helen, and she's having a birthday party, 21st birthday party. She kind of invites him, but he doesn't really want to go in, so she goes upstairs with him, kind of invites herself. She takes a shine to him, basically, and he's obviously very shy and kind of sweet-natured. He appears to be. What did you think of his acting and his presence in this?
I thought it was very good. He definitely comes off as like rather sympathetic, as you say, shy. I just thought if I saw him in the street, I would think, oh yeah, he's just a shy young man, if you will. Maybe in his 20s, and there are a lot of shy young guys when they're that age. We're still kind of learning our ways around. So I thought he was very relatable. He did a good job of kind of portraying that innocence, even though we as the audience, the voyeurs, if you will, we already know exactly who he is
and what he does, right? His modus operandi, I liked him. He did actually remind me somewhat of a sort of Peter Lorre. He had a Peter Lorre vibe, when Peter Lorre's a more sinister character in some films. For example, M. The child murderer film from the 30s.
Yeah, that's a classic.
There's also a few films he did for Hitchcock in the 30s where he's not that sympathetic a character, but it's kind of got a similar vibe. And again, in Casablanca, he's a much more sympathetic character in Casablanca, but he's older in Casablanca, so he's less like this version of Mark. When he was younger, I kind of feel that vibe. So Helen invites herself in, but during that, he kind of shows her films of when he was a child, and we see basically his father treated him as a guinea pig to experiment on the nature of fear, throwing a lizard at him and making him scary, and recording the boy, both sound and vision, right? Recordings.
Exactly, yeah.
It's very dark and sinister, and again relating to Psycho, it's how the parent affects the child. But Mark is clearly a damaged individual by all of this, right? And he's become obsessed with recording things himself. And that is often the way when people suffer trauma, they kind of relive it. I think they're trying to desensitize themselves, so it's less painful as a memory, and they kind of repeat things that they've suffered themselves. And him filming, death, killing someone is kind of an extreme version of what his father was doing to him. At one point, we see he even records his son's reactions as his mother is dying on her deathbed.
Yeah, it's just terrible.
We also see his father married a woman weeks after his wife died, a young blonde woman. So it troubles him. One thing I will note at this film is it's got a lot of red-headed women in. Did you notice that?
Yeah, you're right. I didn't until you mentioned it just now, but you're right. It really does. Yeah,
the ones he photographs tend to be blondes or brunettes, but women he interacts with, for example, Helen is a redhead. There's an actress played by Shirley Anfield. Shirley Anfield is beautiful in this. She's not got much of a part, but she's like an actress, being filmed. She's not naturally a redhead, but she's a redhead in this. And also there's a stand-in who very vivacious and can dance and stuff, who's also a redhead. It's kind of interesting, and it's almost like
I wonder...
you got to think, well, if they'd have made his mother's replacement a redhead, unfortunately it was filmed in black and white, so we can't actually see the hair color.
Right.
She looks blonde, but if they'd have made his mother's replacement a redhead, that would have really tied into what was all going on here. And Helen indeed is a redhead too, you know, girl he's attracted to.
Absolutely.
And you can tell he considers her different from his other targets, because at one point she asks him, "Will you film me?" And he's like, "No, never." You know.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that means he's going to kill her. He wants to record her pain, and he doesn't want her to cause her pain, so he just won't do it. And
it's interesting how real life killers they tend to do this kind of thing too. Like they'll have like a wife a lot of times. Like I'm trying to think of the killer clown guy. I'm sure our audience
I can't remember.
Now. But you know he like had a wife and a family, and yet here he is going out and doing all these terrible things, you know, and it's just like, but yet he doesn't harm his own family. So it's, it's interesting. Like I say, I feel like the film, they had to really study up on some psychology, and I don't know exactly how much they knew about serial killers at the time. Obviously we know a lot more now, having studied guys like, Jeffrey Dahmer and things like that. But
profiling, the science of profiling, stuff like that.
Exactly.
But it's interesting. They also have this great dynamic in the story of Helen having a blind mother and they live directly under Mark. So she hears him every night going and watching movies. Right. She knows what he's doing each night, right? It's in a sense.
Oh, yeah.
She kind of can detect he's obsessed with something because of the constant repeating of the same pattern every night. We also get Mark interacting with models. He's photographing, and that's kind of fun because he's obviously quite timid and they're quite, confident. And it just makes me laugh. Somebody like one of the ones who's beautiful too. She's saying things like, I got a bruised face because I was out with my boyfriend and my husband caught me," and things like that. It just made me laugh.
Can you hear me there, Mark?
Yeah.
Oh, you cut out for just a second there.
Okay, I'll repeat.
Can you repeat
saying.
That one more time? Yeah. Sorry about that.
All right, we'll leave a 5-second pause to help you edit, and then I'll just repeat it.
Awesome.
I also quite like the interactions he has when he's photographing the models. He's obviously quite timid and shy, but they're not, right? They're not. So
not at all.
He deals with a beautiful woman. I can't remember the name of the actress, but she's got long blonde hair and she's quite, direct. And she says things like, "Oh, can you help me with this bruise? Could the makeup go right?" She said, I was out with my boyfriend and my husband called me," which made me laugh. And also, there's a model there who has got a sort of disfigured face, hasn't she? And she said, "They told me you only needed the body." And he like, she goes, "You don't need to photograph my face." He goes, I want to see your face." He's kind of really entranced with this distortion. Again, it fits with what's going on, but it's not no direct reason for that, is there? It's kind of, but it's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So we're finding more about this guy. It's almost like he's sympathetic to her, but is she some sort of guinea pig or something he wants to observe? Not that he goes after her or anything, but he's just taken with it. I'm curious. I wonder if
this was sort of like one of the first films to sort of give humanity to a killer, essentially, specifically to a serial killer. I can't really think of any others.
Funny enough.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. M does do that.
It's quite an unusual one. There's not many that are like that. There may be others. There's probably some in film noir, maybe, things like that. But
it could be, yeah.
He, we see him working at the studio and he's kind of busy, but he also starts talking to one of the stand-ins. I think it might be the stand-in for the main actress because she's got bright red hair too. That might explain why she's got the same kind of hair as the lead actress, who's very vivacious. Her name's Vivian. She dances around while Well, she's talking about, oh, you can make me a star and all this, because he says he'll sort of photograph her, and he's just doing his business, trying to set up and stuff like that. Now that's played by a famous dancer, Moira Shearer, a dancing actress. She was a ballet dancer. She was the lead in Powell and Pressburger's The Red Shoes and The Tales of Hoffman. So she's
a good dancer.
She can dance. Well, yeah, she was in The Red Shoes. She's amazing. She only gets a small sort of screen time here, but even so, she's very effective. And basically, he's just getting ready to kill her. And then we see he's going to kill her. And he's basically part of his tripod. One of the legs has got a blade in it, hasn't it? So, and he can hold it up. And he comes towards his victims with this blade going towards their throat, with the camera right in their face.
He does, yeah.
And it's quite
sort of just loses his humanity. Kind of directing her. He becomes very monotone. Kind of like his father, actually, thinking back on it,
Funny enough, it kind of reminded me of, John, what's his name? I forgot his name. Played Dreyer in Shadow of the Vampire. John Malkovich. His take on the director, right? Just cares about the shot. Doesn't matter what else is going on, cares about the shot. And Mark becomes that, right? Kind of becomes that as when he's doing this filming.
Personality switch almost.
Yeah, and then when they find the body in the studio, it's shut down for the day, and the police are kind of gathering. Mark climbs up into the rafters and starts filming that again, like profiling kind of indicates that serial killers might do. Revisit the crime and try and get something out, get more sugar out of the gum, as it were.
Right.
But he's filming in the rafters, and some pens fall out of his pocket and land on the floor. But it's far enough away, the police just hear something and think it's the studio cat or something like that, right? So he got lucky there. But it sets up quite a tension as us, the audience, because you think, I was going to get caught now. But you kind of want him caught, though. So, it's one of those.
It's interesting here, too, because as the audience, we... In many ways, we're conflicted because we want him to get caught, but we also don't want him to get caught. You feel tension for him here, which is quite brilliant that they've done this, because normally in so many films, you just want the bad guy to get caught. He's just the root of all evil. But here it's very it's done very differently than a lot of films, especially for this time period.
Yeah, one thing that did make me laugh is they've got this director who's a real pig of a man, really.
Yeah.
Basically, the actress does something wrong and he goes, stupid bitch, and things like that. And it's like, this feels a bit strong for 1960. But
it really does.
Even so, that happens, right? I wonder if some of that was trimmed in some of the release areas, actually. That seemed a bit unnecessarily... It wasn't really needed for the scene, but, it's kind of made me laugh. But
it was... there were directors that were doing that kind of thing. They didn't treat the actresses very well back then. Well,
yeah, Hitchcock for one, right?
Indeed, exactly.
So the police, the method of being killed is the same. So they link the two cases. They also notice at this point each victim died looking terrified. And then they pick up on that, and then they start interviewing everyone, including Mark. And they ask him why he's still running his camera. He says, "I'm just making a documentary," is his reason. And then when he gets back, Helen and him go out on a date, don't they? And she does pick up on the fact he carries his camera everywhere, doesn't he? And he kind of has to. It feels like it's a compulsion with him, but in the end, he's like, oh, yeah, I'll leave the camera. So this is possibly a sign he's coming out of, it might be a road to recovery thing for being able to give up his camera. And he does. And in fact, he gives it to her to put her away rather than taking it upstairs. And they kiss briefly. But her mother comments about some of his behaviour, that she also knows that Mark often is looking through Helen's window Even though she's blind, she knows. And Helen's like, how do you know? He goes, she's like, her mother knows. She obviously could hear him, maybe, as he's coming up the steps.
She mentions that you have to be quiet or be careful, rather, for a man who steps softly, I believe is the way she words it. But
it's very good.
Yeah.
The woman playing her mother is very good. And in fact, she goes up to his flat after he's even out with a daughter and starts to talk to him. He goes, I've been in this room many times. And he's like, what do you mean? Because I hear you turning on the camera and all of this. So even though she's there, he starts looking at his latest, killing. He can't help himself. But she's blind, so she doesn't know what he's watching.
Exactly. Yeah.
But she can kind of tell he's not. He's got problems, right? And then she starts saying, "Look, if you're gonna do this all the time, we'll just move." And he says, no, don't worry, I will never photograph or film Helen. And also their date, she talks about, are you going to film me? And he's going, no, never. And there's one point they see a couple kissing as they're walking down the street, and Mark just goes subconsciously to reach for his camera. It's such an odd thing to do.
It is,
when a couple's just kissing in the street.
That's one thing that his father would do that when he was a kid. So, he's just repeating those learned behaviors over and over again.
Yeah. Now, a psychiatrist happens to be on set who's counselling the actress that has found the dead body, Shirley Ann Fields I talked about. The character's name is Pauline. And he happens to chat with Mark. And he kind of knows Mark's father's work. And he says, you got your father's eyes. And that's a really interesting. Basically, it's quite a revealing conversation. Mark's saying what happens. He's asking him things that kind of indicate he's the killer, basically.
Yeah.
But the psychiatrist is like, just brushes it off. It's so odd. It's such a big clue, and the psychiatrist doesn't pick up on it at all, does it?
Yeah, he's just kind of happy to be there and to be observing, I guess, how film is made and. But I get the impression by this point
he does talk enough to the police to for the police to start wondering about him, right? There is enough that he tells them, right? Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, he has that interview with them too earlier in the film. But by this point, I felt like he's like wanting to get caught. At least that's kind of the impression I got. What did you think, Mark? Do you think he wanted?
I feel like he just can't help himself. So it could be wanting to, subconsciously at least, wanting to be caught, or it just be he cannot help but present how he's presenting.
Yeah.
He just can't help it.
Very true.
He's obviously not that wise to the world in many respects, because he's been so isolated, I guess.
Yeah.
And they actually. They tail him to the one of the policemen sort of tails him, but Mark is aware. He actually sees the policeman who's tailed him across from the street and is photographing Millie. So you think that she's safe because they know where he is and she is, but no, he kills her as well off camera.
Yeah.
But he does kill her. Helen happens to go up to his room, and she's kind of interested, and she sees there's a film on the projector. And I think she writes him a note, doesn't she? She writes him a note.
Because she asked him to photograph people for her book, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I can't remember now. But she leaves him a note, but she does start running the film, and we don't see what she's watching, but we see her expression slowly change when she realizes what she's looking at.
Yeah, it's a great shot.
It's kind of it's face acting, right? It's a good piece of work. Anna Massey is delivering there, and she slowly gets more and more upset, and then finally Mark turns up, right?
We know he's going to pop up at some point.
Yeah, Mark basically shows her that not only did his father film him, he wired the whole house for all sorts. And then it wasn't obvious watching, but I read up on it afterwards. She recorded, he had recorded in the past Helen with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was getting a bit fresh, right? So he's been recording everything throughout this house. So it's just weird, right? Well,
yeah,
it clearly is weird. So he explains, he puts a mirror on his camera when he films this so that those people can see their own face, their own fear as they die, which is like the only revelation. We weren't privy to that before, were we? We just saw the knife.
The spike,
yeah. So he can film their own reactions. And then he starts doing it to Helen. And we see her reaction, but in the end, he just can't kill her. The police turn up because they put it all together because Millie's dead, right? They know that it's him. Mark then, it's clear that this was his plan. He basically wanted to be caught so he could just kill himself, and he does. He impales himself, filming himself, which is the end of his documentary. Been his life, making this documentary. It feels like. So as the film fades out, the police come in, the film fades out, we hear his father saying, "Yes, you're a good boy," and the boy crying and things like that. That's it. What a film, right?
It's a pretty heavy film, especially for that time period.
Yeah, it's under 2 hours, and it goes at a fair pace. There's some really interesting stuff going on it. I mean, it's a complex. This is possibly one of the most complex psychologically based kind of movies of its era, I would imagine. There's some really interesting stuff going on here for a movie. I mean, these complexities in plays before and books, but not so much in movies. I mean, having said that, there are films that have complex psychologies too before this, but this was quite the standout, wasn't it? And it's just odd. Why did the critics think it was so terrible? It's really odd. Was it because it was so perverse? Maybe.
That's what I was thinking. Like maybe, I mean, but there's really, I don't know, by today's standards, I guess. I always try to put film sort of in its time, and I guess maybe back then, they think, okay, it's in really bad taste because it has, working girls in it, and maybe that's some of the thought. I'm not sure totally, but I mean, by today's standards, very tame, I would say, but it does contain a certain heavy weight about it that still is there, and that makes us as an audience feel, which is what really good films do, and this film certainly accomplishes that.
I feel like, for example, in the American census, I mean, they'd already been subjected to Hammer, right, in the 57, 58 with Dracula and Frankenstein, and another British film turns up that's even more pushing the boundaries, and it might have been something to do with that. But even so, I don't see why the critics were so. I can see why the authorities or the censors would have been incensed by it somewhat, and that probably contributed to its delayed release. I don't know. I didn't read up on that. But the fact is, it seems like obviously a great film, but it wasn't treated so. But we've seen this before. I mean, The Thing was treated like a nonsense film, and look how that's changed. And there's several films along those lines, isn't there, that slowly have built their reputation, and now it's kind of hard to see why they wasn't always treated respectfully from the start, looking back on it.
It's very strange how film of its time, sometimes it's ahead of its time. It seems like this happens to I was watching a thing on Excalibur earlier before we recorded, and that film is very beloved now, but it was pretty panned at the time. Not as much as this, of course, but it's very strange how it works.
I think Rocky Horror, for example, didn't do well at the time, and it's grown and grown and grown. And people were walking out of that and stuff like that. I like this. Basically, they've got a sort of a summary here from Rotten Tomatoes, where it's a consensus view, which is Peeping Tom is a chilling Sorry, I'm missing that. Peeping Tom is a chilling methodical. Sorry, I don't know why I was having trouble with that. I'll start again. Peeping Tom is a chilling, methodical look at the psychology of a killer and a classic work of voyeuristic cinema. Which, That sounds about right. And this is one of those films. Martin Scorsese describes this as. He says, Peeping Tom and 8.5 say everything that can be said about filmmaking. How about that?
Yeah, that's high praise.
Yeah.
I have to agree in many ways,
Yeah, and there are quite a lot of more recent horror films that deal with voyeurism. And like, if you're watching this, aren't you complicit? You know, they're kind of much more in your face about that sort of. But I find those a bit, BS-y, because it's like, well, you're making the film and then trying to make us guilt us about watching the film. That's just silly, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting, though. This being one of the first ones to sort of ask the question, like, hey, like, for example, are you a bad person, I guess, if you're a horror movie fan, you're getting enjoyment out of suffering, these people suffering. And, it is an interesting question, I suppose. I don't know. I wouldn't say, like, for myself, anyway, I would say I don't think it makes you a bad person because, a film, I always think of like, okay, this is fictional. It would be very different if you were watching, a snuff film, so to speak. And which, I mean, as far as the plot goes, this guy is creating sort of a snuff film, but also more of a documentary of his life and his suffering. And, it's in many ways him trying to express to, I guess, whoever is watching after he's gone, hey, here's what I've gone through and why I've done what I've done. It's a fascinating look at a lot of different things. But yeah, I really I like all it has to say. I think it really was far ahead of its time.
Yeah, it's just a shame that a great filmmaker like Michael Powell, his career, basically, he didn't do anything after Peeping Tom. He probably did it a bit, but his career was completely wrecked. I mean, a great director. It's just like Hitchcock losing his career over Psycho, but it wasn't, right? Because Hitchcock was lauded for Psycho.
Exactly. Not
Michael Powell wasn't lauded for people. Yeah, and it's so weird. I'm pleased to say that Michael Powell died in 1990, but this film was recognised as one of the great films, horror movies, and he saw that sort of saw that change in attitude before he died. So he didn't go away thinking he made rubbish, or he probably knew it wasn't rubbish. I'm sure you kind of know, but he just didn't understand why it was treated that way, perhaps. And generally, this is considered one of the great horror films. Total Film voted it the 24th greatest British film, not horror film, British film of all time.
That says something.
Same magazine also listed it as the 18th greatest horror film of all time. It's Guardian named it the 10th best horror film of all time in 2010, and in 2017, the Daily Telegraph listed it as one of the best British films ever made. So it is treated with a lot of respect, and so on. So it's now a very well-regarded film. Would you agree with that viewpoint?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really a must-watch, I think. Like I say, for horror fans, but also just for film fans in general. It is a very strong look at film and all these elements of it, In fact, I think it's maybe a little underrated even, even though it's achieved all these things. You see a lot of films like Psycho that are terrific films, but you got to wonder, would there be a Psycho without a Peeping Tom? Which did it first, and they
were made contemporaneously. They just happen. It's one of that. Sometimes you get two films that are really similar coming out at the same time, but they just happen to be on the same track and dealing with. It's amazing how similar they are. We got a young man who's sympathetic but murderous, right? So Anthony Perkins delivered the same kind of character with Norman Bates. We got parents being the instigator of their damage,
suffering,
suffering. We got girls being killed. We got police slowly getting more and more suspicious. and although their reasons are different, for the murders, there's a lot of connective tissue between these two movies. They would make an excellent double bill. I mean,
absolutely.
And it's kind of interesting that this is bright color, whereas Psycho, Hitchcock elected. He could have done Psycho in color, elected to do it in black and white for cost saving, but also it gave him a different way of tackling. Didn't have to worry too much about blood going down the plug hole, because black and white kind of dealt with some of those issues that may have arisen, and things like that.
Right.
It's an extremely Freudian film, this, I think.
It is. That's a good
penetration and, sublimation of sexuality and things like that. And it's interesting that as soon as Helen comes on the scene, he wants to get better. It makes him kind of act like he wants to get better. Whereas Norman Bates, as soon as he feels some sort of sexual attraction, the mother in him takes over. So it makes him worse. Whereas in Peeping Tom, it's possibly he's rode out of this hell life that he's in, this track that he's on.
Because he even talks about like seeing a psychiatrist, I believe. I know he talks to the psychiatrist, but it seems like he's maybe interested in talking to someone, because he talks with Helen's mother about it a little bit. It's very fascinating how they kind of do that. And I just had that thought now. I didn't even really think about it the first time I saw the film. But
in terms of timelines, I've got it here. Psycho got a premiere 2 months after Peeping Tom premiered in London. So it did come a little after. So that's kind of interesting. That some film historians have noted that actually some elements from Vertigo, which Hitchcock made in 1958.
That's a spectacular film.
So it could be that Powell was influenced somewhat by Vertigo, because that deals with voyeurism too. Somewhat.
I could see that,
as does Rear Window, say, right? And things like
it does,
But
Hitchcock,
we've already met. He did a lot of stuff about voyeurism. And lots of films where people see something but mistake what they see for what actually happened, and stuff like that. So it's kind of and the slashing, the knife is the murder weapon as well. In many respects, again, our Helen is kind of the final girl as well. More by accident than surviving, as it were. Also, in this, the killer doesn't want to hurt Helen, even though he tries to, he can't. That's what saves her. So it's, again, a more sympathetic kind of slasher than we're used to. Right.
And in many ways, she's still definitely a victim, because he basically apologizes to her for telling her sort of about his terrible traumatic childhood and his grief, and I think he regrets that it's her that has to sort of hear about it and then of course see what he does in the end. But it weighs heavy on the audience. It really does. I think it still holds up very strong today. And there's not much gore in this film either, Mark. Except for the final shot. I think there's like a little blood on his chin, maybe, but like dribbling down his chin, I should say. It's not. There's really nothing gory or bad here. So really, I think much like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a lot of it is almost what you don't see in this film. But people do sort of fill in the blanks for themselves sometimes, and maybe critics and audiences were sort of filling in those blanks back then and making this film out to be even worse than it was. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, that's all right. No, you're fine. One of the other things I like about this film is frankly, the working girls, specifically the one that Mark interacts with most when he's are very much not victims of their circumstances. They seem to have a very strong agency and are self-possessed. I quite like that. That kind of makes a change as well. So that's kind of interesting. And it's possibly that rubbed up people the wrong way too. I could
that
see
could be too.
Right. So we got some any final thoughts? Do you want to rate? Should we rate? Let's do final thoughts and rate, and then we'll get to the feedback. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds perfect. Do you want me to go first on this?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Man, an excellent film. I think it holds up well. I think the pacing is very good. I do think it gets a little slow in some parts, would be maybe my only criticism of it. But even then, like, I don't feel like you could cut anything because the character development is very necessary, especially the part with the mother. So I think I'd probably just leave it as is. But so I don't want people to say, he's like complaining of the runtime. But I don't know. Like, I don't think it could be trimmed, but I think there are parts where I was like, okay, it should move along a little bit, but maybe that's due to its age as well. Maybe it's just me. Yeah. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. I think the acting is superb. I think the photography is just terrific. And, you get a lot of shots, obviously, of our killer himself preparing for shots, which I think is interesting. It's also kind of cool to see just sort of how they were doing stuff back then behind the scenes. And, that's kind of uncommon for back then to see sort of the cameras and the sets they were using, things like that. Yeah. But the story just, man, absolutely good. You walk away from this feeling kind of a weight, which is actually absolutely what you want from a psychological thriller. So, if we're going to rate it out of 5, I got to say, I probably still give it a 5 out of 5. Absolutely worth seeing. Very, very good. And just, as I say, every horror fan or just movie lover in general should see it. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, this is a 5 out of 5 for me. There's just so many good things about it. One of the things is when you watch it, you go away thinking about it, right?
Yes.
And it sticks in your brain for a couple of days. And unless a film is particularly gross or funny or something like that, films that stick in your brain for a few days is usually a sign is you've seen a classic or near classic, right? That's what that usually means. Or you see, it might be a specific performance. You've seen a classic performance. But in this, I think it's the whole thing is what works. It is a bit jarring to have basically a German playing someone who's English and clearly English and lived in it, grew up in England, because that's what the story is. But you soon kind of get over that because he's very good in this role. He's quite a sympathetic character through both his manners and his words, right? He kind of conveys that quite well. And you can kind of see why Helen is taken with him too. It kind of makes sense, right? This is a very solid film. I wouldn't call it scary. I don't think it's scary. What it is it's tense in places, and it's thought-provoking in places, but it does absorb you. I do sit there not thinking about anything, just being one with the film, as it were, just being totally absorbed into it. Right. Okay. So we both.
Yeah, it's one of those films you just can't look away from it. Really, I feel like I like how you say, Mark, that it's a film that you're going to think about, after you've seen it. I think that's so true because, with a lot of films today, not all, but a lot that comes out, it's almost like throwaway cinema. You watch it once, and then I know for me anyway, like I just. The next day, I can hardly tell you what I watched. It's like, I don't even remember what that was about. And like I say, it's not all films. There's still really good stuff that comes out now. So don't get me wrong here. But this is a standout. And I think it's one I'm going to come back to very soon,
Yeah, it's we haven't really mentioned it, but the music's very good.
Oh man, very effective.
And I really like the performance of the blind mother as well. That whole scene is electric, and you could cut it and it would still work as a film, but it was electric. It was really effective and interesting and subtle. The mother wasn't like, don't talk to him ever again. There was none of that, but she was reserving judgment, right? And that's quite a subtle thing to do. It's almost play level kind of way of doing drama, but it isn't. And this is true of all of Powell and Pressburger's films. You watch any of them, they're I mean, Black Narcissus is electric to watch.
Oh
right?
man, that's an absolute banger of a film.
Yeah, and this is that kind of level as well. You know, it's kind of really close to being top best film ever made. It's not quite there for me, but it's, you know, it's
up there.
I've seen a lot of films in my life. I'd say this is in the top 20 of all the films ever made. Something like that.
Yeah, I could see it.
Very effective. I would put Psycho on the same level as well. Just as we keep talking about Psycho, just to say Psycho is my favourite Hitchcock film. I know that other films are rated higher, but it's my favourite Hitchcock film. It's one I can return to again and again. And Peeping Tom, I put at the same level as well. Okay, so feedback. We've got 3 small pieces of feedback. Let's just go through it. First one's from Kevin Matthews. Hi, Kevin. And he's kept it brief and to the he's kept it brief and to the point. He says, can't really put together a better comment than just to say absolute classic. Fair enough.
Yeah. I agree.
We got some feedback from Barry Earn. Hi, Barry. And he says,
Barry, what's up?
He says, it played at our local Reps Theatre last fall and didn't do very well. It was probably too obscure for most people around here. Fair enough, but I think the people that did go and see it probably got a lot out of it. And you know what? If I'm going to a Rep, I actually like going to Rep cinemas that aren't particularly full myself. I kind of I like the space. Because Rep cinemas tend to be very small as well, you know, so enclosed in. Anyway, our final comment is from Trish Greer. Hi, Trish.
Hi, Trish. How are you?
Friend of the show. And she said, great film. Carl Burnham was trying to break away from his recurring role of Kaiser Franz Joseph in the Sissy films. I have no knowledge of any of this, so thanks for sort of giving us some new information there, Tish.
Yeah.
I think I said Trish. I meant Tish. Sorry, I should have said Tish. It didn't help for moviegoers to see him in this, and it didn't help him make the jump to English-speaking cinema, but it is a fantastically creepy film, and he really nails it. Hitchcock's Marnie borrows a lot from Peeping Tom in the cinematography and colour department. You are right. Sean, the colour palette.
One I haven't seen.
I'm picturing. Well, it's a great film, but it's again quite psychologically complex and quite a bit more adult. Actually, I know that this is quite an adult film, but Marnie, if anything, is very adult. It really is not something someone under say 18 would be able to process. I don't think and really understand. I saw it at a very young age. I think I saw it about 10. And it's like I thought it was interesting, but I didn't quite understand what was going on. And watching it later, it's like, boy, this is not a film for a 10-year-old, because it involves sexuality and that team being tied up to murder, and you know, bad things. So Marnie deals with kind of things like that. So yeah, I can see that they look and feel the same.
Another one to cover or at least add to the list, you know.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because if you were to sort of compare Hitchcock's Vertigo, we've talked about, or Rear Window with Marnie, and then you compare Peeping Tom to Marnie, Peeping Tom does look more like Marnie than Vertigo and so on. So yeah, I can see that. The look is much more so, and it's got a rich palette as Marnie, particularly around the colour red. And the red is a significant thing in the film, Marnie, as well. So thanks, Tish. That's a really interesting point. Not one I considered, but I totally see it. I've watched Marnie a few times, so I kind of can. Yeah, I totally identify. And in fact, films after Peeping Tom, like The Birds, look more like Rear Window than Peeping Tom, but Marnie does indeed look quite a lot like Peeping Tom. So yeah, I see it.
Okay, check that out too.
Yeah, I think we're about finished now. So
yeah, do
you want to do the honors?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up, guys. Thank you so much for hanging with us. You can find us wherever you get your fine podcasts. We're on everything pretty much. You know, if there's something we're not on, please let me know on our Facebook group. And to access us on there, come hang out with us. You know, Facebook, just enter in United Nations of Horror and the Facebook group will come right up. We are the only one We're also on YouTube now, Mark, making a lot of strides there. And we appreciate those who are watching. It's still wild to me that people access their podcast through YouTube, but that is a big popular thing now.
It's massive, isn't it? It's like you get...
It is, yeah.
100 times more listeners through YouTube than you do through podcast apps. I don't understand it either, but I'm glad you put them up on YouTube.
It's kind of wild, and like I try not to do a ton of extra video stuff, just sort of an image that repeats itself for the YouTube.
I'm wondering if we should, start actually reading some of our feedback from those. I know that it's not going to be feedback about what we're talking about. It'll be about past ones, but it'd be kind of interesting to cherry pick where the comments are suitable. And
I agree. Yeah,
promote some discussion. It might be worth us having a look through some older ones and like also mentioning those. Maybe we'll start that next episode, but we'll see.
I agree with you. So, that's another place you can leave us comments. Leave us comments on the YouTube channel. Also, you can leave us comments direct through the podcast description now. Pretty much wherever you see the podcast, you should also see something. It'll say like leave a text, leave a comment. That's actually something I just set up like a few weeks ago. So that's another way you can get in touch with us. So all those ways, please reach out. We love your feedback. We really do love to hear from you guys. I appreciate it. And I just want to say that I appreciate all the listeners. You guys are one of the reasons that we continue to do this. And gosh, Mark, we've been doing this for 10 years now, I think?
Yeah, something like that. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, and it's a labor of love. We've refined the formula a little bit. I don't think we've really changed much about how we go about doing it. But
we used to have more rotating co-hosts, didn't we? But we kind of settled down into this over the years. But
yeah. So hopefully we're here for years to come. And but join us. And I've rambled on and on here. So thank you guys so much for listening. Mark, thank you as always. It's a pleasure, man. You're the master of film. You really are.
I'll say it for you.
You have.
Yes. And bye from me.
And we'll see you right back here next time on the United Nations of Horror.
The United Nations of Horror is a podcast about all things horror. From thrillers of yesteryear to today's modern horror, we are here to present fun and intelligent conversation about the genre films we love. Join us and please help spread the word about the United Nations of Horror podcast and videocast to horror fans across the globe. Find the podcast on all fine podcasting services. Join us on Facebook by simply going to facebook.com and entering in United Nations of Horror. You can also find us on YouTube by going to youtube.com and searching for United Nations of Horror podcast.